Recently, I did a stream on Twitch where I showed the entire process of making a card from concept to cut, and I showed the various softwares and techniques that I use. First off, I find a piece of artwork to use for the card. It might be something I see in the wild that interests me, or it could be a commission. In this case, it's a piece of artwork from Theo Berserks, who I had worked with to make that Skull Knight card before. So I messaged her, and she created an extended version of the artwork for me to fit onto a card. The artwork and editing program that I use is called Krita, and it's free to use. I plan to make this into a Berserk trading card, so I get a cutout of the actual trading card game frame, and then I position the artwork where I want it to be on the card. I also want to make a full art version of this card, so I need to crop it to the size of a card. After getting everything sized the way I want, I export both as PNGs. The software I use to assemble the cards is actually a website called Component Studio. This is not free. It costs about $10 a month to use. I'm not going to go into detail on exactly how to use this website because it's quite confusing. It's a bit complicated, and it uses datasets in a way that pretty much mimics the way mail merge works in publishing software like InDesign. I spent a good amount of the stream brainstorming exactly what the card was going to do in the end, what the name of the card would be, what the description of the card, and the statistics and details on the card. So I got a little bit of help from people on the stream, and eventually came up with what you're going to see in the end. One of the things that I spent a long time on is the quote. A card doesn't need to have a quote or a flavor text on it, but I like to do it. So I spent a while looking for a quote, and I ended up settling on a quote from one of the video games, specifically Berserk and the Band of the Hawk, the Dynasty Warriors type game. In this game, there's expanded dialogue from a lot of the characters to kind of, flesh it out and pad it and add some content. So there's quotes that don't appear in the manga or anywhere else. And what I ended up settling on was Zod saying, "Have you come to be killed?" I think it fits the artwork well enough, so why not? So I finish filling out the rest of the details for the card, and then I go to the design export part of Component Studio, and in here there's like a sort of proofing window where you can just kind of look at what the card will kind of look like. It's not perfect, but we can see the title that I put in. You can see all the icons that got automatically added and everything. You can see the positioning of the artwork and all the other details, including the artist name at the bottom of the card there. So pretty much everything looks good, and I think it's actually ready to be exported, and then I can finally print it. And the way you export a single image in Component Studio is this tiny little hidden button. There we go, it's downloaded. Then I hit up my publishing software, which is called Scribus, another free program. It's very nice. So I use Scribus to print everything, and now that it's out, we can take a look at it, make sure the colors are nice, and I think it's good. So we can begin cutting off the bleed of the print. And this is why I needed extended artwork, because whenever you're doing this type of thing, some of the material gets cut off, and you don't want the focus of the image to end up being what gets cut off. I'm using a roller type cutter here, and of course I forgot to wear gloves for a while. You don't want to touch holographic material with your oily fingers, so I put gloves on after touching it a bunch. Yeah, the roller type blade is really good for cutting single layer sheets of stuff. Now this is 2 layers because it does have a backing on the vinyl, but it's close enough. It's very, very thin. And later on, I'm going to need to use a different cutter because the roller cutter cannot cut through multiple layers that are adhered together. It crimps the edges and it just looks awful. You probably noticed the way that I printed these is not the way that you might see other people make cards. I printed both sides of the card on one side of my material, and that's because I fold it in half, and that helps me align everything really, really well. It's still not perfect. I mean, you're never going to get perfect without manufacturing, but it's pretty damn close. So yeah, I just create a fold line, and then I put the cardstock in the middle. So there is still cardstock, however, it's not the surface. So this is considered a vinyl card. I smooth everything out to make sure that there's no bubbles before I fold over the other half, and then I smooth out that side as well. Now, like I mentioned, in order to cut through all of these layers of material, I'm going to need a better cutter. I begin by just, cutting the perimeter of the card outside of the crop lines using scissors, and then I move to a bigger cutter. This other cutter is called a guillotine. Now, before I actually give it the finishing cut, I lay down a piece of waxy paper on top, and then I use a squeegee to flatten everything out and really, really push out any possibly remaining bubbles and make sure that the three surfaces are adhered as closely together and as flatly as possible to try to prevent any curving. You may be able to see that there are crop lines around the perimeter of the card. I'm going to cut just inside of those towards the center of the card so that all of the crop lines get removed from the product. It can take a little bit of practice to get everything aligned well, and it's really important to cut these straight, because if you don't have pretty much perfect 90-degree angles, then cutting the corners round is nearly impossible. Even with a nice tool, even with like a dedicated corner rounder, if you don't have 90-degree cuts, then it's gonna look like garbage. So now that I got all the sides cut, we take a peek at it, make sure everything's nice, make sure there's no frayed edges or anything. Then I take out my corner rounder tool and I just punch all the edges. It's basically like a hole punch, but it works on the edge of a material. There are lots of different corner rounder tools. The one that I use has a window in it so that you can see the corner poke out of where it's supposed to be cut, and it kind of helps make sure that it's aligned well every time. And now we have a completely finished card. I no longer ink the edges, so this is actually done now. And there's the full art backside, and it looks really, really good. I'm very happy with it. This is actually my test cut, so it came out pretty much perfectly, and it's actually, a high enough quality that I'm, totally happy with selling it or giving it to someone. A lot of the times test cuts, the first prints and cuts of cards come out really poorly, and it can take several attempts to get it right, but this came out beautiful. And so I pop it in a sleeve. That's actually a perfect fit sleeve, just to make sure that it fits the actual dimensions of a real card, pretty much, roughly anyway. And then I package it all up to send to the artist, because whenever I make a card using somebody's art, I send them a free copy of that card. Obviously, there are some more steps to this entire process. I can't really go into every possible detail, and I also don't want to hamstring myself by really giving away all my secrets, but that's the gist of it.